Okay. All right, it's recording. So I think we're good. Whoever wants to start us off.
I can start if you want.
Okay.
So while I'm walking, my question I was going to ask was, it's kind of my one that's like related to both of my books, or like, all of the three, and then the main book was like, in a lot of mine, like a theme across them was that the sibling that was like neurotypical, like they felt guilty saying it, but like wish that they could like change their sibling that was on the spectrum. And I guess my question about that was like, I don't know, I guess having that in books is good for like the neurotypical siblings, because like, it could help them feel like they're not the only ones that feel that way. Maybe it would take some of like the shame out of their feelings, but then at the same time, like if someone that was on the spectrum read that, if I read that, that would make me feel bad, and it would make me feel like even more of like a burden on my family. So I just kind of wondered about that, because that seems to be like in a lot of the books about children or siblings with ASD. And I know we talked, like it's in that one article, but I just wondered what y'all thought about like the pros and cons of that.
I think that's starting to get into like a different side of representation, like you said, that's representative of the family member.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that could also be representative of the character with ASD, but I think, if I was a child with ASD and I read something like that and it's like, okay, does my family not like me this way? That would hurt, obviously. Like I would be like, well, this is who I am. You can't really change it. There's nothing to fix. So I think it is good that people can see like, oh yeah, we've got, other people who feel this way. I'm like, I'm not an awful person for wanting my brother to be more like me, but I think for a person with ASD, that could be very hurtful lens to kind of view themselves through.
Yeah.
I think that as teachers, we have to have, I brought this up, or we talked about this last week. You have to have a variety of texts in your classroom, so that there are texts for those students who have ASD, but maybe there are texts for those students who have a sibling with ASD. And I think the important thing to consider is the audience that those books are intended for, and that, if a child with ASD does read a book like Rules that is, told through the lens of a sibling and shows a lot of the frustrations or difficulties and all that stuff, I think that it's an opportunity to raise like conversation, and it's an opportunity for families to have conversations about that. And that's like how we need to view it, is as an opportunity and that kind of thing. That's kind of how I would take that.
That kind of leads into my question. I put it on the discussion board this week. I don't know if you saw it. It was about if you have a child of ASD in your classroom and you're reading these books aloud, like as a read aloud or whatever, and there is a child in there with ASD, like how do you make it so like the kids in the class aren't gonna, turn towards that kid and maybe like say, well, what do you think? Because I mean, I know kids are curious and they know like, oh, hey, he is different. And if this book is kind of talking about the qualities that he has, I don't know how you would make that, make him feel comfortable while teaching that. I don't know.
Well, I think you would have to kind of just make it normal, like include the discussion of autism when you're discussing like basically just the differences between all peoples, whether it's disabilities or cultures or whatever. I think another good thing to do would be to talk to the parents about it before you read whatever book. And you could send the book home with them, or just say, hey, we're reading this. Or you can ask the kid and be like, do you feel comfortable answering questions about this? We're not going to portray you as like the be all end all wisdom on autism, but just to, I don't know, you can make friends that way. Just kind of see their comfort level with it. And if the kids are like, what do you think, Johnny? And they're not comfortable with that, you could just divert it and be like, all people are different, and go into that conversation.
Yeah, do you think it's kind of what I was thinking? Like, kind of going based off of what Jessica was saying about like taking that opportunity, like I feel like if there's someone that has ASD in your class and you read rules to them, like naturally the kids are just going to do that anyways, but kind of taking that opportunity to be like, well, little Johnny, you know, he's on the autism spectrum, but explaining like how much like how it's individualized and how like one person is not representative of like a whole group, and kind of like you could even like go into like Emily said, other races and other cultures, things like that. But I think I would take that as like, I'm almost like not be glad that it happened, but kind of take that as an opportunity to explain that difference, because I think that's something that like I know adults that I think would do that, you know, and they may not mean any harm by it, but I totally agree, Allie, it could be harmful if the person didn't feel comfortable with it.
Now, if the person didn't feel comfortable, like, would it still be okay to, like, read it when the kid's not, I know this sounds bad, but, like, you know, if the kid's absent or something, would that still be a point to bring up, well, yeah, like, or would that be too much of talking about him behind his back, you know?
Oh,
I don't know.
that's tough.
I know, it is tough.
I would maybe, if they said they were uncomfortable with it, I would probably try to think of like another way to approach it. Like I probably wouldn't just do it when they weren't there, because then like what if the next day someone's like, Allie, we talked about people like you yesterday, you know, it's just going to be like, wow, thanks a lot, you know.
Very true.
I think also going back to that like representation of both people with ASD and then like the families of ASD, like maybe more lean towards it's like a whole class discussion, those books about kids with ASD. That way you kind of learn like, you know, what it is, how people react differently to things, kind of more of an understanding side of it for the whole classroom. And then maybe if you have like a sibling of a student with ASD in your class, and this is probably getting way too specific, but if you have a student, like a sibling who has ASD, then you can show them like, hey, here's this book that you might want to read. And, you know, there are other people out there. That way it's not like with the kids with ASD kind of pointing out, oh, you're different, there's something to like fix about you. But then the student who does have a sibling could be like, okay, well, you know, I'm not an awful sister or brother for feeling this way. Like other people have thought this too. So kind of maybe going on an individual basis with that, but then with the whole class probably leaning more towards an understanding side of it and kind of learning what it's about and how people are different and how we can treat them that way.
And I was thinking about, as I read my books, but especially I read Slug Days. I don't know if anybody else read this, but I was considering how primarily, you know, with that book, I was thinking this would be a great opportunity to give a student in my classroom with ASD, give them this book to read on their own, and almost like a test run. Like, how does this student feel about reading about characters with autism? How do they respond to reading in that way? You know, if they come back and they're like, I really enjoyed that book, then I know that that's a topic that they are willing to read about and interested to read about. But if they react poorly to reading that book, then I know that might not be like something that I want to read about later on. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's a good way to gauge how that particular student will respond to that, and doing it in a private way where it's a book that you recommend to them and it's a conversation between you and the student, I think covers a lot of bases.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it makes me think about how in Beth Fry's class, we were talking about how like as teachers, we have to like really like sift through all of these books that are out there and like be on alert for like chapter books, picture books, even just like different news stories like that are really happening. And it's like if we can keep ourselves updated, then we're gonna have that higher level of inventory for our students. But if we're sort of just like keeping the same books and whatever, and we're not really, you know, like she suggests that we sort of like go through our libraries and say like, you know, if our class vary from year to year, which they do, then it's like, so should our texts, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe just like sending home a list and like asking them what they like ahead of time and all that stuff. So I think it really does help to have that wider range of inventory too to work with. And that means we have to, you know, keep checking up on Reading Rockets, keep checking up with news stories, you know, other colleagues and stuff like that. I think that variety does wonders. So I think that's a good point.
I think you have to be careful though with like saying, oh, you should read this book. I think you'd have to really be like, I don't know if tasteful is the word, but just careful, because I think like, I don't know, if it was like I have this birthmark on my face and someone was like, oh, this book is about someone that has like a facial deformity, you should read it. Like, I don't know. I just think you have to be careful with things like that, because some people might be like, no, like, or someone's parents, even like Jenna was talking about parents, someone else might be like, well, did you give this to everybody to read, or did you, like, I just think you'd have to be careful with that. I think that could be really good because some kids may really love that and like thrive off of that, but I just think that's something that like you got to be super careful with too.
Yeah.
Well, my question is kind of related to those two questions. When I was reading rules, there's one part that really stuck out to me. It was on page 110, and it says, I think Catherine was talking. She said, how can his outside look so normal and his inside be so broken? Like an apple, red, perfect on the outside, but mushy brown in the first bite. It really stood out to me because it's a very visual, clear image, and I'm a very visual person. But I wasn't really sure what to think of it. It made me kind of sad because I think that a lot of people view people with disabilities as something that needs to be fixed, like they're broken, rather than viewing them as these are things we can help with and work with to live a good quality of life. So I was just wondering what y'all thought about that. Any thoughts that came to mind?
I think it's important, especially when I was reading, to remember that Catherine, she is 12. And so as much as like, she's been there for all of David's life, she might also still be learning what exactly it means for him to have autism and how she can respond to his autism, like the different kind of behavior tics he might have. And so I think, in those instances that she gets frustrated, I think that, not a great side of her can come out, but I think that she is still learning. I mean, she's 12, so I think that's kind of important to keep in mind. But yeah, that is a really visual, that did kind of hurt my heart too. I was like, he's not broken, he's your brother, he's okay, he's just a little different. But so yeah, I think it's just a constant thing maybe of just kind of learning with him as he goes along, and he might change and his behaviors might change. And so kind of learning what that means each time and knowing how she can respond to it in the best way for everybody.
Well, maybe I'm taking it like a little bit too, like, I know it's not real life, but I honestly feel like if her parents said more to her than, your brother has autism, whenever she got frustrated because of things that he was doing, then she wouldn't feel that way. Like, I think if her parents were a little bit more, like, explained things a little more and explained that concept of he's not different. I mean, he's just because he's different from you and from, most of the people that you see, that doesn't mean he's broken, Right. And I think it's the same as like what Jenna was saying. It's just a matter of immaturity, like with her. But I don't know. That was just to me an example of just like her parents' absence, like in the situation. But
yeah, Carrie. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Just real quick, going off of that, Carrie, like maybe if they explain like, oh, this is why he doesn't like that. Like to him, like, you like maybe touch him on the arm, but to him it feels like you're hitting him on the arm or something. So maybe like explaining it further. And so just being like, that's just the way David is. He has autism. I agree with that. Sorry, Jessica.
No, you're fine. A little bit of a different spin on this. When I read this part of the book, I have a cousin who's just a few years younger than me, and he is on the spectrum. And so this really hit home for me because personally, like, I know growing up, there were a lot of times when we would be together as a family and things would happen, events would occur, and the adults would just be like, well, you have to understand he XYZ, like he's different and we have to be sensitive to that. And as a kid, that was really hard. And it was really frustrating because I always felt like the adults in my life were making excuses for him, and he was never held to the same standard that I was. And I found that really frustrating, being someone who was technically his peer. Like, I was always like, why can he do that and I have to do blah, blah, blah? Or why can he make that comment and I can't? And so now I'm older and I understand a lot more about what being on the spectrum means. And I would even say I'm more compassionate to him now that we're older. Maybe also partially because of my profession, but I understand, like, when I read that, that was me. When I was her age and when I was around him and he would do something, I was like, why can no one understand, like, he looks totally normal and no one understands that, like, he's messed up and, like, there are parts of him that it's frustrating to be around him sometimes. And so I understood that, and, like, obviously, like, I love him so much. He's my cousin, he's part of my family, but I related to that. Just like if you've seen Parenthood, the character Max and the interactions that his family have with him, that, like, was my family growing up, and the frustrations that his family members feel with him and that kind of thing. And I'm not saying that that's right, but there's a learning curve for families, and there's a learning curve for people that are around others with a variety of disabilities. And so that was something that I personally, that was stuck out to me in the book. So I'm glad you brought that up, Emily.
Yeah, it's a really an adult concept, autism, and, like, at face value, kids just see that it's not fair. And it's, I don't know, I don't have a family member with autism, so I don't know how you would, like, adequately explain that to a kid, that this is the way things are, but they're still fair. That
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Again, going back to last week, we talked about that fair isn't always equal. And we talked about that graphic a little bit. So
Yeah.
Now, that'd probably be the best way to explain it, because it's not going to be the same treatment in those situations.
Something that really stuck out to me in the book was, it starts on the bottom of page 165, and it's sort of going through when he, like, wants to be able to run, and he has dreams that he can run and all this stuff. And so at the bottom of 165, she's saying, like, I imagined you, like, without your wheelchair, like you were in your dream where you can run, and how Jason really, like, does not take this well and, like, does not receive it well. And you know, he says at the top of page 166, he's, you know, I want my wheelchair in the picture, like, that's who I am, that's such a big part of who I am. And it's like, I think she was trying to, like, say, like, you know, I don't see you just as this person in a wheelchair that I help out at a clinic. And my question sort of was, like, I thought that he would sort of receive that well, like, oh, I'm so glad that you were, you know, being, you know, paying attention to my details about the dreams and that I wanted to run, and that I was more than this kid in a wheelchair, and how he didn't receive that well. And my question sort of was like, what did you think about that? And, like, as an educator, when you find yourself in that instance, when we're looking for that, like, sort of superior response, like the best response we can have to these things, like, how do we go about that? You know what I mean? Because to me, I was like, oh, good, like, that's great. And then I turned the page, I was like, no, it's not. Like, he hated that. You know what I mean? So it's like, that was sort of my question. What did you think about it? And how can we sort of give those best responses to kids? Like, how do we go about that? So
I think with that, with the wheelchair, it kind of brings up the whole, like, I don't see color, which as a theory is great. Like, don't, you know, discriminate somebody because they have a different skin color than you, because that's just ridiculous. There's no basis in it. But that's denying, like, a part of who they are. Like, you know, you do have white skin, you do have brown skin. So when she says, oh, I don't see your wheelchair, he's like, okay, you're saying, she's trying to say, I see you as more than your disability, which is good, but the wheelchair is part of him. Like, he's in a wheelchair for his life. And so I think that is a really hard, like, thing to tackle, because you want to be like, oh, you know, well, they're, you know, they're black, like, that's all I see. Like, that's part of who they are. That's not who they are, though. Like, there's so many different things that make up who we are. And so I think if you kind of maybe even were to do a lesson about going below surface level, like what you can see, and be like, okay, well, you know, here's what I see, like, they've got long hair, but here's what I know about them, like, they're kind, like, they help out in the classroom, like, all of this stuff, like, kind of showing you're so much more, like, you're the surface level and also what's inside of you, but not necessarily, like, skating over something and being like,
Yeah.
we're just going to pretend that Jason doesn't have a wheelchair. Like, that's ridiculous. He has a
Yeah.
wheelchair, you know?
Mhm.
I kind of, at first, I was like you, Teresa. I was like, oh, he's going to love that. You know, like I thought it was going to be like a good thing. And then whenever it wasn't, I kind of thought of like someone told me once, like it was talking about someone having a walker, and they explained that like that is an extension of their body, essentially. Like they need that to walk. They need, you know, he needs that to move, to get around. And
Yeah.
so maybe like, I mean, and I don't want to like say, oh, this is how he felt, because I'm not in a wheelchair. I'm not him. Obviously, I keep getting like too deep into this. This isn't a real person, but like,
You're
anyways,
supposed to do that.
maybe, I don't know, he was just like, this is part of who I am, like to have this wheelchair. And so like for her to not draw it, even though it wasn't something that he necessarily like loved about himself, it's like Jenna said, it's who he is. It's an extension of his body. So he was just kind of like, don't feel sorry for me and don't draw it like that. Like I think he wanted people to be like real with him and not like talk to him like his therapist did, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, that therapist, she drove me crazy.
I know.
And I'm glad that you brought up, Jenna, because Teresa, as you were asking that question, I was thinking about that quote, you know, I don't see color. And to me, like anytime someone says that, it's like saying exactly what Jenna said. Like, I don't see your experiences and like, there are a lot of things that like color or ability and all those things, like those are things that people have to live with and that will change someone's life, like to be different from another. And so like I know when I worked with my cooperating teacher and she was in a wheelchair, that was a learning curve for me, was finding that balance between where do I acknowledge that you are in a wheelchair and where is it that like I look at you as a like, you know, like just as a person. And you know, because there are things that like she could do for herself and there were things that she needed my help with, and it was, you had to find that balance. And it's awkward, you know, sometimes to like have conversations about things like that. But I equate that the same way. Like she would have felt the same way that Jason did. Like if someone had drawn her just without a wheelchair, she would have been like, no, this is a part of me. Like this is, you know, how I am. And that's something that she like identifies with now. And for better, for worse, you know, I think that that's a meaningful part of his life or a meaningful part of my cooperating teacher's life. And it would be difficult, you know, to just not include that. So I definitely understand where he was coming from.
Yeah. I was like you said, like it's like finding that balance, and like sometimes it's awkward because when he was telling, you know, about like the dream, and like sometimes I think of myself out of a wheelchair and able to run, and I was like, oh good, she's showing that she was receptive to it, she's respectful to it. But then like after I read that chapter, I was like, well, I get why he was, you know.
Yeah.
So I guess it really is just like a learning curve, and just, you know, trying your best with it. And I guess when maybe it's just like anything else in life, right? When, you know, we misread someone's boundaries, or we miscommunicate, we just say, I'm sorry, what would you like me to do? I think that's sometimes what we can do because we screw up, you know, we take things the wrong way. But I had to like sit there for a minute, and I was like, was that good of her? Was that bad of her? You know, because of course she meant it in a positive way, but how the reception of it was not positive. So
I have a question about Jason. So do y'all care if I go ahead and ask it?
yeah.
So Catherine at the beginning of the book desperately wants a friend, and she gets really excited because she's getting a new neighbor, and she's like, oh, we're going to be best friends. We're going to be best friends. And then as we read, we find out that friendship is not, you know, as great as she thought it was going to be for a variety of reasons. But then at the end of the book, we see that she winds up she's gradually made a friend of Jason instead, and she's wound up making a really good friend in Jason. So what sort of message do you think this sends to readers about friendships, about abilities, just anything really, like the theme of the book? What do you think it says?
I think it says, I don't know. I kind of thought it was kind of ironic because she wanted a friend so that she could get away from her brother's disability, and then she ends up making this friend that, you know, like has, it's not the same as her brother, but I don't know. I guess that, I don't know if you'd call that the message, but just that, like, you can't choose your friends that, you know, like you can't choose your friends based on their abilities. You can't, just because she's a girl and she has a cool room, you know, doesn't mean that she's going to be your best friend, or that you maybe even don't even, you know, if you even want to be friends with her after some of the things. But anyways, I just thought, I don't know, I thought it was kind of ironic, but I thought it was a good lesson for her, because I think she ended up liking Jason more in the long run. And, like, you know, I don't know. I just thought it was ironic, but I thought it was a good lesson in don't choose your friends based on outward appearance or your perceptions of them.
It also made her realize that, because I think the last page of the book told her old friend who moved away, it said, I'm going to call something about the old friend. It just made her realize, like, that there are good people out, like better people out there than her neighbor. Because who was that friend?
Melissa?
Yeah, was it Melissa?
Yeah.
Yeah, she mentioned something about, look forward to, like, calling Melissa. I can't find it right now, but.
It says, before I climb into bed, I circled it on my calendar when Melissa will be home. I have so much to tell her, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, that part right there. Because she sounds like a better friend than Christy.
Christy.
No, I was very disappointed to see, like, the I guess the lack of development in her relationship with Christy. And I could I think I was sort of receptive to it when they went to the pond together, and, you know, I just felt like Christy wasn't really all the way there, and she was just sort of, I didn't feel like she had her really at, like, her interests at heart. And I could feel that as I read it. And then it's like, she goes to this dance, and it's like, she, you know, she says at the end of page 197, you know, she goes, I lift my hands, I reach for the ceiling, the sky, the stars, and I dance. And it's like, I feel like that's, you know, she never felt that towards Christy, you know. It's like she felt that about Jason as a friend, like she grew as a person, and, like, they really, like, came to, you know, like each other and respect each other. And I feel like kids really need to know, because I feel like kids do get sucked into, like, oh yeah, she's a girl, she lives next door, she's my age, like you said, she has
She's cool.
She gets sucked into the nail polishes, like, good Lord, you know. So it's like, I don't know, I think that's really important for kids. So
I mean, honestly, I've gotten burned by that, by, like, being like, oh, she's pretty, she has nice clothes, I want to be her friend, and then they treat me like dirt, you know. So it was like, or not that they were so horrible, but it was just like, after you got to know them, you were like, why did I want to be your friend again? You know? I think this is a good, like, middle school girl lesson.
I think for me it was really hard, and I talked about this a little bit last week, it was really hard for me to get away from the juxtaposition of the way Catherine treated David and the way she treated Jason.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of had to keep remembering, okay, she is 12, like, she's learning, like, she lives with David, she only sees Jason like a couple times a week. So I think without even her realizing, I think she learned, like, okay, you know, David's different, he requires a little bit more patience, all of that, kind of like the way Jason does. And I think, talking a little bit more about Christy, I think she wanted to understand David and David's situation. And I think she's kind of how the majority of neurotypical people are in trying to do that. But it's uncomfortable to have that conversation. It's uncomfortable to ask, like, you know, what's wrong with him or something, or kind of start that conversation. And then once you start to, like, fully understand, because, I mean, Christy is also 12. So, I mean, these are 12-year-old girls dealing with things that not even, like, I fully understand completely as a 22-year-old. So I think, you know, kind of getting away from this ideal friend and kind of seeing, like, okay, well, just, you know, hanging out with somebody and, like, sharing our interests and all of that. I think it was a really big lesson for Catherine throughout the book, and just kind of maybe even learning a little bit about her relationship with David through her relationship with Jason. So
I love how you correlated Christy to, like, to people who really don't, like, know about ASD, and how, like, they just, you know, it's not maybe it's just not a part of their understanding or their repertoire, or they've never experienced any of it. And her being 12, like, it's like, you sort of want to be like, okay, well, whatever, Christy, like, I didn't want you to be friends with her anyway. And it's like, we can't do that either, you know what I mean? Like, so it's like, we have to be receptive to the fact that people don't understand ASD sometimes, and that's okay too, but that can be hard as educators. But
I have another question, and it's not my question because I already asked my one about the book, but do you guys, now that we've all read it, I don't want to worry about giving anything away, but you know the part where they're in Catherine's room and Christy's like, David, do you like to dance? Like, dance. Like, did you think she was trying to be mean, or did you really think she was like just trying to let him have fun? Because I was like, okay, stop. Like, I don't know. It kind of made me mad. But I was like, maybe she really didn't mean to be mean, but I don't know. I kind of thought it was.
I thought it was like
making fun of him.
I thought it was like 2 steps below the gum thing. Like, I felt like when, what's his name? When Ryan did that with the gum, I feel like there was definitely well, first of all, there's definitely a lack of awareness. We know that. And then B, I do think there was an element of him trying to be like snarky and mean. And I feel like hers was probably about 2 or 3 steps below that. I think it basically starts with that unawareness and then not knowing where that line is. I don't think she was intentional about it as Ryan, but I don't know. I did not like that part either. So
the way I felt was it was kind of like, I feel like she sensed that David had a lot of energy, and that, you know, Catherine was kind of always like, David, calm down, like, calm down. And I think it was her more so giving David permission to kind of let that energy out. But then I think, I don't know, a gear shifted for me when Catherine was like, no, like, don't dance, David. It just, that whole scene was just really awkward, and I don't think that I fully understood what was going on. I didn't take Christy is making fun of him the way Ryan and the whole gum situation went down, because you knew that Ryan had been bullying him like at the bus stop and everything. So it was just a very strange scene to read and kind of try to figure out what was going on, but I don't think she meant anything bad by it.
Yeah.
Do you think, like, this just kind of occurred to me, but as I read it, I completely agree. I kind of had like some mixed emotions. Like, I was like, does this make me uncomfortable, or like, do I want to believe the best in Christy, that, like, you know, she just is trying to be nice? And so I'm wondering, do you think that the author made the intentional choice to not make that a clear-cut scene for us, so that people who were reading could take that scene to be what they needed it to be? Like, maybe they correlate it to, you know, a time when someone has taken advantage of someone, and like made fun of them, or a time when maybe someone has shown compassion. I don't know. That's kind of my thought, because I really struggled with that scene, and I had very mixed feelings about it and did not know exactly what that scene was supposed to be. And I wonder if the author intentionally made it kind of muddy waters, so that it could be taken both ways, and so that more readers could relate to it. I don't know. Just a thought.
I think another message to take from the whole relationship between Catherine and Christy, is that her name? Mm-hmm. Is that besides David, if he was out of the picture, like, they're not going to be friends. They just don't have the same interests. They're not the same people. And that's okay. I think I'm glad the author chose to put that in there, because you meet some people and you're both fine. You're just not going to be your friend because you're not interested in the same things. So I kind of took that as something that Catherine wasn't comfortable with, which maybe Christy shouldn't have done. But, like, it's just a further example of how they're just not quite the same person. They're not really on the same page. That's how I took it. So I'm not really sure. I think like you said, the author was trying to kind of leave it open-ended for someone to interpret based on your own personal experience, I guess.
I think that's a really good way to look at it. Like, people who, like, you know, and I don't want to say people who intentionally want to make fun of people with autism, because I hate thinking that anyone does. I know that people do, but I think people who relate to that more are going to see Christy as making fun of him, whereas people who don't have that first instinct, I guess, are just going to kind of look at it differently. So I think that's a really interesting way to look at the way she wrote that particular scene, and you just kind of take it the way, I guess, your personality and how you are as a person would be in that situation.
I had a question. Oh, sorry.
Did you need to say something else?
No, you can go.
Okay. I had a question about Jason. The whole kind of romantic situation between Catherine and Jason. I think that in truly treating people with disabilities just like everyone else, that includes the not so fun parts like rejection. So I think a lot of people feel that it's harder to tell someone in a wheelchair no because life has already been not the greatest to them. So how would you respond if you were in Catherine's place to that situation with Jason? Or if you've been in that situation or advise someone, how would you advise someone to respond to Jason if you didn't like him?
I don't know. I kind of think that she did kind of like him a little bit. Like, I don't know if she fully, I mean, maybe they weren't on the same page, but I think she did like spending time with him, and she did look forward to it. And, you know, maybe it doesn't, because it doesn't say clear cut and dry whether she liked him or not. But I would say if you did like him, I mean, I think I would encourage them to, I mean, she's 12, so I probably wouldn't be encouraging her to date anyone, but say she was like, you know, I would encourage her to pursue that, you know, and just kind of, I think there would be that learning curve like you were talking about, Jessica, because things are going to be different. If she didn't, I think that's a lot harder. And I think it's like you said, Emily, I think maybe it's because, you know, like Jessica said, you see like sometimes it's different treatment like in, you know, school and things like that. So maybe just like for me, I'm like, I'm going to hurt their feelings. Like it's going to, you know, it seems worse, but I guess you're right that you should, you know, just be honest about it in the same way that you would be with other people. But I definitely think that would be harder. And I think that's something that like, I don't know, maybe I've never said out loud or ever even thought about, but I think you're right that like if someone, especially if it's like a, like, you know, any kind of physical disability or mental or whatever, I think that would be really tough. But I would probably just advise them to be honest about it. But, you know, if you still wanted to be friends with them, be friends, you know.
And
That's
I think even
question.
that, yeah, and I think even that was like made a little bit murky too. Like that was sort of like muddy waters because I feel like she really showed up for him there at the end. You know what I mean? Like I think she was very she knew that she cared about him, and she knew that he brought out this side of her that was like that made her dance and made her, you know, just made her feel like herself, made her feel comfortable and confident. And I think that she like showed up at the end for him. I don't know if she like romantically did, but she did say like in the book, like she's like, I had to tell Melissa that I danced with a boy and that I really liked it. And it's like, we don't really know like what that actually entails, but I think like the fact that she like made such a point to show up for him, that was sort of like them saying like, listen, if you say something wrong or you do something wrong towards someone, like show back up for them and explain to them. Like when she was at the dance with him, like that was such an amazing instance of like courage and honesty, how she was like, listen, like I wanted to be separate from my brother and I didn't know how to open up about it. And you know, I think that there's a lot of value in that. So I think that was also made murky by the author as well. So
I was glad that this author included that storyline because a lot of times I feel like people shy away from talking about that topic, like you said, Emily. And like Atypical is a show that's devoted to talking about and examining that reality that people with all abilities have, you know, a desire to have relationships with other people, romantic or otherwise, and sometimes it's hard. And so I appreciate that, even though this is a book about, she's 12 and I think Jason is a little older than her, but even though it's got young characters, it's still a reality for those characters. And I think that's real. And I appreciated that in the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it definitely went to showing people with disabilities as a person with feelings, like you said, all kinds of feelings.
I had a question, my question about the book, not about my ASD one. When you kind of look at the rules, like the title of the book and then the list that Catherine makes for David, like kind of in that back of the book, that she sketches it and everything, do you think that those rules are actually helpful and beneficial to David, or because I kind of viewed it more as a list of things like that he can't do necessarily, or things that it's very hard for him to remember, and I don't know his exact circumstance, like how, severe, what his exact characteristics on the spectrum are, but maybe it's things that he actually cannot remember to do or that just don't come that easily to him. So I was wondering if you guys think that that's a beneficial list that helps him, or if he kind of looks at it and just sees this whole long thing that his sister's made that maybe he can't do, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think it depends on if he actually follows them, like the rule with the no toys in the fish tank.
Mm-hmm.
He obviously didn't care about that one.
Yeah.
So I think it just, does he understand the rule, first of all, and is he actually following it? Because if he's not doing it, then maybe you could rephrase it, or Catherine's 12, she really shouldn't be in charge of how he looks at the world, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of giving that responsibility over to his parents or his therapist or whatever. I think the rules are more for Catherine, kind of to help her make sense of everything in her life and in David's life, because she kind of listed out like, David can't do this, I know David can do this, like all of that. So I think they're more for Catherine than David.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in her own little way, she was trying to help him, but it wasn't the most effective.
Yeah.
Well, I thought, like, some of them, I think, like, you have to knock on the door, and stuff like that. I think those were 100% for her. But I do think, like, remember, late doesn't mean not coming. I think she just, like, rule. I don't know. I guess I didn't think about them as really rules. I thought of them as, like, her attempts to guide his, like, his frustrations, and also hers, and also just, like, his everyday, day to day, especially because she knew her dad was going to be late every time. So for her, like, if I just keep telling him this, maybe, he won't get so upset. Now, that didn't really happen, but I mean, I think she was trying to, in her mind, I think she was helping him and helping him understand how the world works. But I agree, some of them were just for her.
Yeah, and I think like you said, I think she really was trying to like lay the groundwork, like, with the late doesn't mean not coming, and like what's another one? Saying you'll do something means you have to do it unless you have a very good excuse. Like these are very good life rules. I just don't really know how receptive he was actually to that, and to what point do we remain patient? Do we remain keeping the rules in place? And when do we change it up, right? Like the toys in the fish tank. Like it was almost like he would like do that. He would put a toy in the fish tank and go marching into a room and be like, the rule is no toys in the fish tank. Well, guess what I just did? You know what I mean? Like, so it's like, when do we keep those rules in place? When do we abandon ship on the rules? When do we change them? Was he making fun of them? Were some of them helpful? Is that, I think that's just something you have to go case by case and, see. Like the one for her dad, I thought that was really helpful, but like we said with the fish tank, that was just, it was almost like he was making a joke out of it, and it's like, we're not really getting too far with this one, so.
I have a question that's kind of all-encompassing, but it involves the rules. In Slug Days that I read as one of my books this week, the character constantly refers to coping mechanisms that she's been taught as her plan. This is part of my plan, da 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 da. And so I kind of equated that to Catherine's rules in the book for David, and how the rules are kind of part of his plan. They're things that she tells him, things that he remembers to help him XYZ. But I'm wondering, do you guys think that having books like these in your classroom on your shelves for students who maybe have ASD, but maybe have something else where they have some kind of a plan implemented, whether it be, explicitly written down or what, do you think that that would help them understand the plan and help them understand the purpose of it and the function, and maybe make them feel better about having one? Or do you think that this would not be helpful to have books like these to kind of facilitate that? Sorry, I know it was loaded. That's kind of my ASD question, but I'm trying to pull in all the texts that we've read too.
Right. Yeah.
I think, again, having that variety is still important, because I don't know what I was thinking, but in my head I was like, okay, look, we have these novels to pick from, to choose. And then when Brooke sent out this list and it was like picture books, I was like, picture books about ASD. Like, for some reason that didn't click with me. I don't know why. So I think having that variety and having different mediums, like even we were talking about earlier, like different news sources and everything, I think it is still important. You just, again, like Teresa was saying in her class with Beth Fry, like you have to be careful about what you choose and kind of constantly be updating. Like maybe one of these books just won't be as relevant in 10, 20 years as it is now, and something's going to change and more information will come up. So just keep updating. But I think it wouldn't be very fair or even representative if you didn't have books like this in your classroom. So
I think, Jessica, too, it could be really helpful if say you had a student and you were trying to get them to establish a plan or to remember to, when you start feeling this way, maybe try this, things like that. I think the book could be a really helpful tool in that like, see, this works for Johnny or, whoever, and like kind of talking through it. I think that could be really beneficial. So I think yes.
I think having the books in the classroom definitely promote to have that like inclusive environment and to be more accepting of some of the more different behaviors that a student with autism would have. I think you would have to definitely read what books you do put in the classroom and kind of scan them. Like one of the books I read, Waiting for Benjamin, he was talking about how he said he didn't want a special brother. And in that instance, special was used negatively as a label for his brother. So kind of talking about how they're different and it's okay, or just because someone with autism, you're trying to include them and they respond positively, they may not always do that. Their behaviors kind of change. So definitely include those resources in the classroom. Just when kind of sticky situations in some of the books come up, have a class discussion about that and explain it and kind of point them towards the accepting, inclusive nature of autism and pointing out that everyone's different. These are just examples of behaviors that someone with autism might have. You don't necessarily have all these.
Let me ask this. One of the books that I got was about Temple Grandin. Do you guys know anything about her?
I read that one.
I got it because it was like on the website. It talked about that you could use this as a trade book in science. And I thought, well, yes, this is a book about someone on the spectrum. But it's a book that you could use in science. It's a book that you could use when talking about, women. Like you can use this in a lot of contexts. And so how do you guys feel about books like this that maybe you use them in a completely different way, or even rules? Like who knows, maybe you use it for a totally different reason, but it just so happens to have autism as a, thing in the book. Like, do you think that's a better way to approach all of that?
I think that's just as, if not more important, because it's not specifically like, okay, we have a kid in our class this year who has autism. Let's read some books about people on the spectrum. It's also kind of just more literature of seeing like, okay, here are people like me, like here are experiences I can relate to. Like Temple Grandin went on to create the cow machine. Like she completely redesigned the way farms ran. Like she had autism, but that didn't stop her from doing what she did. So kind of that being the back burner of that book, I actually kind of liked. Like she did say, here's why I thought of it, because I like it when I like feel like secured and everything.
Yeah.
But I think having those experiences and maybe just even having a kid come across it like in their free read, like they pick up a book, it happens to be rules and it's like, okay, the brother has autism, when it's not specifically a lesson about autism, I think is very important, if not more than just, you know, using these as an autism lesson kind of book.
This is off topic, but if you guys know about Temple Grandin, she has a really good, there's a movie out about her. Well, it's like a very old movie, but it's really good and you got to watch it.
It talked about it in the book. It sounded really good.
Yeah, I watched it like back in like middle school, I think, and it was so good.
What's the name of that book that you
This
have?
one is called The Girl Who Thought in Pictures.
Okay, I think that's like the kids' version of a book that I have by Temple Grandin called The Moving Pictures.
It is, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Well, go
I
watch
think
her video.
that also shows like it extends to more than just someone with autism can relate, because Temple Grandin had a very specific obsession with cows, and she used that and turned that into a career and a profession, and she made a big difference in the cattle industry. So I think that can kind of inspire other kids who are like, okay, I'm really interested in this. They may not have autism. What can I do to incorporate that into my life and my work? So I think you can use that to just, I don't know, high schoolers who are trying to figure out, what do I want to do? Do I want to go to college or not? It can kind of inspire them to think differently or to explore alternate career paths.
Yeah.
Even
I just thought it was interesting. Like, I don't know if I've like expressed well, like during our conversations, but I think that that's the way I would like to approach these books, is by focusing on another element and having autism maybe be a part of that book, but not be like the focus of, today we're going to talk about autism. Like, no, that's not beneficial.
Yeah. I don't really like that either, especially if you have a kid in your class. I just feel like that's like so, like, that's like everybody look at them right now. Like, I feel like that's how
Yeah. But I feel like that would happen. Like, it's going to happen even if I feel like if you read the Temple Grandin book, like,
I just feel like if you approach it that way, though, like, it's a little bit more like, I don't know.
Right. No, I totally agree. And I think it's better to do it the way you were talking about, Jessica, where you use it as a subject and like go off of that, and not focus on the autism part.
I think going off of what Emily was saying, like people having the obsession, and I'm kind of going to go back a couple of weeks to the portrayal of autism in media and kind of the whole savant autistic who like they like something and they get really, really like genius level into it. And I think, and it's actually a fairly common characteristic for people with autism to have something that they really like. Like it doesn't have to go to that level. And so I think using the Temple Grandin book kind of being like, okay, like she doesn't know maybe a lot exactly about cows, but like, you know, she used her experiences and what she did know about farming and kind of combined them. You know, she probably didn't know like how many cows or when the whole world or something that only someone with an eidetic memory would know. So I think kind of showing that and maybe having shows a little bit more like that and getting away from that savant trope. Sorry, I'm still on that. I just, I don't like that trope. But I think that would be a good way to use it as well and kind of showing like, okay, you have this interest, you can still do things with it. So
my question is, it's related to this, but it's kind of going to go in another direction too. But my one about ASD, whenever we're talking about like the obsessions and stuff, because I was just looking at it earlier. I don't know, I guess that's what you call it. But like I was looking at today about like, I went back to those articles that we read at the beginning about like anxiety and autism, and about how like that's really hard. It's really hard to like tell the difference sometimes because of the similarities, but how like, you know, sometimes they're just more intense. And it talked about how like sometimes people that have autism that also have anxiety? Like, what if it, say it was cows, or like maybe I kind of thought, I was trying to think about like when relating it to rules, like maybe for David it was like the video store, like it was saying that whenever people have anxiety and autism, it's like to the point that they like worry about it like all the time. Like people with autism maybe like think about it a lot and are excited about it a lot, but like it becomes like a consistent worry and fear. And so that's kind of how I guess it ties in. But my question was just what your thoughts were. I didn't know how to phrase the question, I guess, exactly on like the whole thing with anxiety and autism, because to me when I was reading through the articles and stuff, it just seemed like it was very much still in the experimental stages of the research. And I guess I just kind of like, as I was even trying to understand it myself, it felt like a lot of the like characteristics of people with autism were very similar to things that they were describing that like people with anxiety like experience. And so I guess I was just wondering, like it was talking about like, you know, medication and how difficult it was to tell the difference. I guess I was just wondering, like, I don't know what your thoughts were on it, if you still felt like it was super needed. I'm not saying I feel one way or the other about it. I was just curious about what other people thought, because I was just kind of like, it seemed really hard to differentiate the two. If that makes sense.
I think both of them, anxiety and autism, they're not as well researched as they could be, because anxiety is still considered a mental disorder, and that's a very taboo subject. Like no one really likes to talk about it. No one really likes to think about solutions for it. And so I think it's more, this is a really hard question to answer. It's more like viewing anxiety and how it manifests in each person, because kind of like autism, anxiety, I feel you can kind of fall on the spectrum with it. You can have very, very severe anxiety where you have like very bad panic attacks like every other day. It can be worse, or it can be less and manifest in kind of, you know, your stress builds and builds and it just explodes at one point. Like it's different for every person, just kind of like, you know, autism is. And so I think the majority, as much as we can kind of generalize it, the majority of the time it happens in individuals with autism, it does manifest in those like kind of attacks, and like the anxiety comes out and something might happen, like something might touch them the wrong way. Like people on the spectrum with sensory issues, if something just doesn't feel right, it can set them off. And so I think it does go hand in hand. I just think more research needs to be done on both to kind of figure out what's going on there exactly and how best to help. And I think it, again, this is all very much on an individual basis. I think it does vary person to person what will help and what exactly sets them off.
I think that symptoms of like autism and anxiety are so intermixed and like very, very similar to each other. It's very hard to tell, is this a characteristic of autism or anxiety? Kind of like some kids are diagnosed with Down syndrome and autism. And it's like, where does one end and the other begin? It's really, really hard to tell that. So therefore it's hard to work with that. I think there's a little bit more research on autism than there is with anxiety and autism. I think it's not why it's not being researched so much is because it's not really people's focal concern, I guess. Like you said about mental issues, people don't really talk about it because it's uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. So I think that's why there's more research with autism, because it can be very apparent rather than the anxiety in autism.
Yeah. Okay, kind of my question with autism, it kind of went back to my other one about the rules and David as teachers. If we were to have a student on the spectrum, kind of like David, who had a very difficult time socially, had a very difficult time following the rules, in a place like a school where there's so many rules, like, you know, quiet in the hallway, in a straight line, like, you know, the bell, we have to start our work, then how would you guys go about working with him on that and kind of making it a comfortable situation for the student, and also maybe not as like pull your hair out on the teacher kind of way? Like, how will you incorporate a student on the spectrum like David in a classroom?
I think David would have an aide in the classroom. I hope he would have an aide, because I think that his needs need much more focused attention than like a gen ed teacher could give him. So I think if he did have an aide, he really should, that they would just work together on, like, say if there's a fire drill, they take David out first before the bells start going off, like those types of things.
I also think when I was a camp counselor, we had a student who I don't know if he was on the spectrum, but he had some similar characteristics to David, and we did like a sticker chart. I think I talked about this a little bit last week, but I might implement something like that where, you know, it's how did this student do with this transition, and how, you know, did you earn a sticker in math, and all these kinds of things. And talking about, you know, what does it take to earn a sticker? What does it take in an older grade if it's earning a 1 through a 4? What does it take to earn a 4? And things like that, where it's not focusing on how did you do walking in the line all day, but it's how did you do walking in the line from the classroom to the cafeteria at lunch, and how did you do while you were in the bathroom, and like little victories kind of thing. The other thing that I would probably implement, regardless of if I had an aide or not in my classroom, is especially with students who, not just students with ASD, but students who struggle with transitions, giving warnings. So saying, you know, you have 5 more minutes, and then we're going to switch stations. Or, okay, now you have 2 minutes. Now you have 1 minute. Because sometimes not just students with disabilities, but students in general struggle with that transition. And the student that I had in camp, he really struggled with that. Like when we would go from the playground to the shelter to eat lunch, it was just like the act of stopping one thing and moving on to the next activity was too much for him to handle. And so he needed me to say, you have 5 minutes, you have 2 minutes, you have 1 minute, and then we're going to line up. And that makes a huge difference for some kids. So I think I would implement especially those 2 things. But if I didn't have an aide, I would talk to the special education teacher at my school about what they would recommend for me to implement in my classroom to help that student, because I would assume, have a lot more experience in handling some of those situations than me, and they have a lot more expertise in that. So that's kind of the direction I would go, because I would assume I would rather work under the assumption that I need to plan, and if I have an aide, that's great, but if I don't, I need to be prepared to handle that on my own. So that's kind of how I would approach it.
Yeah, I think also consulting the parents when you first meet the children at the beginning of your school year is a big help, because they've, I mean, this is their like flesh and blood. This is their child. They worked with the child up until this point, and they can really give you some indicators of, hey, it's really social skills that like I've been working to target, but I haven't really been successful with, or it's like, these are some sensitivities, these are things that don't work, these are things that do work. So if you can check in with the parents, I think that would do you really well. And then you can more check into what you're catering to. So like if you were to select like an if-then chart, that's sort of like setting them up to be receptive of like positive reinforcement. And if I do this, then this will happen. And they can sort of get in the groove of the structure of your classroom or whatever it is. And if it's social skills, and then you can, you know, work from there. But it's like, if you don't consult the parent, you're not going to have a lot of those huge cues about, you know, what's best for that child.
Kind of off of what Jessica and Teresa was saying, I think about, there was a kid, and it was like not an app internship, just like a teacher I know from home, and he didn't have any type of diagnosis, but like he had some really intense behaviors, I guess is the way to say it. And like one of his was like scheduling and like what was going to happen. And so for me, like I think being consistent and like following through with what I said I was going to do, like, because I remember one time I was teaching for that teacher while she was doing something else, and like she was assessing or something, and the little boy, like we kept saying, like, okay, we need to get finished with this because, you know, like we're going to start this. And it was like everyone was finished except for him. And there was someone in there helping him, but it wasn't like his aide. It was just for that time. And so we had, like, it was like to the point, like we had to move on. And we were like, when you fit, like as soon as you like put that away or whatever, come join us on the carpet. And whenever we like started, he got so upset because like I had said like something like, you know, we're gonna do it together, you know, something like that. And he was like, you promised you weren't gonna start without me, and like started flipping out. But when like I went back and I was like, let me, you know, catch you up on what we've done, and like explained what we had done to where he didn't feel like he was behind, he was missing out, you know, he wasn't with what we were supposed to be doing, it went a lot better. And so I kind of feel like and kind of like David, kind of the same thing. Like his dad said he was going to be there at 5 o'clock and then he wasn't. And that was super upsetting to him. So I think mine is like follow through. Like that's what like popped into my head when you asked that question.
I also thought about, have you guys ever seen these clocks?
Mm-hmm.
They like count down. Well, you can set the clock, the red thing, and it tells you, well, if you set it for 15 minutes and the kids can watch it go down. And I didn't have one of these when I was student taught, but I would put like a clock on the board, a countdown clock, to tell them, okay, we got 10 minutes to do this activity. And so everyone knew, like, in 10 minutes I have to be finished with this, which helped them like get their work done so we can move on.
And they can see it getting smaller. I like that.
Yeah, and so I had to use an online version where it was like a rocket ship that was getting ready to like blast off or whatever. But I had a child of ASD, and like I asked the kids, I was like, do you like when I put the timer on the board? Most people said yes, and I just remember this one kid, he was with ASD. He said, like, yeah, I like he loved seeing how much time, so he knew like that he had to work for that amount of time, and then he could take a little break, and then we were going to be moving on. So I don't know. I think that's a good thing to use in your classroom. If that helps.
In my classroom, they had little, I don't know the correct word for it. It's a little, gosh, what is the word? It's the clock, but the sand falls through.
Yeah, the timer, and you flip it.
Yeah, they had those.
Hourglass.
Yeah, I can't think of the word. They had those like, and they had different times on them, like a 5-minute timer, a 3-minute timer, and like a 10. So the kids knew, like, they took their blue timers with them and flipped it over and worked until it was done. Picture scheduling is also a really good thing that helped with my kids with autism. They would go and take like a little picture off of a Velcro strip and carry it to wherever they did like reading time, and they would stick it there. And every time they got like a little crazy, the teacher would be like, go check your schedule, and they would go and take their next thing. That really helped keep the classroom in order and gave them like a sense of certainty, like, okay, after this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and they could see it. And even if they can't read, they can see the little picture of like carpet time or PE or whatever.
A note about those timers that you were just talking about, if you guys are interested in those and the different times, they sell them at the Target dollar spot. You can get like 4 timers for like $2 or something, and they have like 1 minute, 2 minute, 5 minute, and whatever. Yeah, but you can
get hourglass ones or like a digital one?
No, like the hourglass. Well, they're plastic, but they're different colors, like Emily was talking about. Like there's a green, a red, a blue, and a yellow. And they're different times. So if you want some, they're there. And they'd be a lot cheaper than getting them somewhere else.
Yeah.
I have some, so. Anything else? Did everybody ask all their questions?
I have one regarding ASD and the other books that we read. So we talk about how in rules, like Catherine has the rules, and she sort of like expects a certain outcome, and she thinks that it's going to be a real pivotal thing for David to listen to and carry out in his life, and it doesn't really work out a lot of the time. And then they talk about like plans and agendas in some of the other books. And my question was, to what extent, or like what is the balance that we need to plan and have expectations, which we know that we have to have those in place, but where is the line between sort of letting kids figure things out for themselves and really figure out what's going on, and like how much do we plan and how much do we sort of let the child grow and make their own mistakes and stuff like that, you know? Because I was even thinking about how in one of the ASD video clips, how the I can't remember which movie it was, but the kid was sitting in the back seat and he had went to school and he was like, why can't I be like everyone else? Like you said, if I went to school, like I would make friends and I could be myself, and that's just not what happened, you know? And it's like, obviously we want to prevent stuff like that from happening, but in the same breath that kids do need to experience things for themselves and realize that even when we do plan and we do try to get ahead of things and we do try to set expectations, that life does happen and that, you know, we don't always have that as a certainty. So, you know, I guess my question is like, you know, what's the line between setting up those expectations and the rules and the guidelines, and what's the line of letting the child sort of realize that life does happen and that there's not always a right concrete answer?
I think that's like the ultimate question for a parent. Like, when do you kind of let the reins go?
Yeah.
Like, how much do you hover and then like kind of like just start letting them go off on their own? And so I think that may have been what Catherine was trying to do with her rules, was kind of be like, all right, some of these are just experiences that David's gonna have to go through, but some things like knocking on a door before you enter, that's just, you should probably do that just for, you know, privacy reasons.
Right.
The other things like the late doesn't mean not coming, that's a life lesson. Like, just because someone's late doesn't necessarily mean like they're abandoning you, you know? And so I think she might have been taking on that role of her parents, like we kind of saw throughout the book, which is just awful because she's 12. But I think that she was trying to find that line between what does he need to learn on his own, like, you know, Ryan's not really my friend, like he's really making fun of me, versus like I need to knock on this door before I go into Catherine's room, like she doesn't like that, like kind of that stuff. But I think you just touched on every parent's question ever, like how much
I was like thinking about that and like, I don't even know the answer to that.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering the same thing, and I kind of wanted Emily to answer, because when you were talking about a fire drill and like taking the child out beforehand, but then I guess like in my head I was like, but what about when there's a real fire, you know, or if there was a real fire, like that you can't go out early. So if you know a child has like a panic attack or is upset, like that could be a matter of their safety. So like, are there times when you should not take them out early, or is that kind of just like if you know that's going to have a negative reaction, you don't go there? Like, well, I wondered what you thought about that.
With all of the special ed classrooms I've been in, most of the teachers know that today we're going to have a fire drill, so they take them out before, because a lot of them have sensitivities to that loud of a noise. But also in the self-contained rooms, instead of having the like screaming ones, they will have like blinking ones or smaller ones. I think they also teach them like, if a fire happens, this is what's going to happen. It's going to start blinking, we line up, and then we go outside. Kind of like, I guess, how you do in regular classrooms. It like they prepare for it, but they're not going to put those kids through it just to teach them, because it's kind of more of a traumatic experience than a learning experience. So if they know, they definitely are going to prevent it, like taking them outside or giving them headphones or whatever. But they're also teaching them how to deal with that. That's a really hard question. Like, do you sit back and let your kids fail, or do you try and make like a perfect environment? I think you have to start off with like giving them support and kind of leveling it off, but especially in high school, because they are entering the real world, and the real world is not perfect. So it's a really hard question. I don't get it right.
And I think that it's a hard question, not just for parents or for teachers of students with disabilities, but for parents or teachers at all. That's a hard question to ask. Like, where do you draw the line between I'm going to protect my child from XYZ and try and give them this ideal environment, and where do you draw the line about you have to learn this because it's life and things don't always work out? And so I think that in the same way we talk about like we're not sure exactly, how to acknowledge differences or whatever and how to go about that. It's the exact same thing. We just have to, I almost want to say it's like a case-by-case basis too. You just have to know the kids, and you have to know, and I would say that's a strength of a lot of parents, and especially like special education teachers who work with these students. Like they know their kids and they know what makes them tick, and not that we as general ed teachers don't know our students, but because these teachers have like totally different relationships with their students, I feel like they know those boundaries and they can kind of gauge that. So I think that's like a really interesting thing to talk about and think about.
Yeah. I student taught in Ireland, and I was staying with my host family, and they had a 3-year-old, and his name was Darren, and she said one of her parenting techniques that she felt worked really well, and it was evident in the child's behavior, his receptivity, his knowledge base, was she really let him like play and figure things out for himself. And I do think that sometimes there is so much value in letting kids do that, because he sort of had developed his own thought processes, at the age of 3. Well, I did this because I thought this would work with this situation. So they really need that problem solving skills. I would almost venture to say, when I was thinking about this question on my own, we learned in Dr. Garwood's class, like how when you're building student relationships and getting to know students, that you have this, checkboard of, did I talk to each student every day? Maybe you add a column that says like, was there an instance I let the child figure that out for themselves? Was there an instance I had to intervene? What instances do I typically need to intervene, where it is above the child's competence level or whatever it is, and what times do I need to let them go? So maybe it's just another one of those things to try to monitor and keep track of and constant readjusting. But yeah, I was not able to come up with one solid answer. So
where did you student teach in Ireland? Was it Wicklow?
I student taught, I was in Wicklow, and it was but this wasn't like at the school. This was just at the house that I stayed at. But yeah, St. Patrick's was the school.
I student taught in Greystones, and I remember.
Oh, okay, yeah. That was like right. That was like 20 minutes away from where I was. Yeah.
Yeah, they had another kid. If you didn't know.
Yeah, no, they did. She's like super mom.
Yeah.
She's like, oh, I already know how I'm gonna deal with this one. I'm like, oh my gosh.
All right, my last question was, what do you think the whole moral to the story was? Like, why do you think the author wrote it?
Jamming his tail off the thing.
Can you say the last part of that again?
Why do you think the author wrote it? So, like, what's the moral of the story? What do you think the moral?
I think kind of showing that interacting with people, maybe with ASD, with physical disabilities, is a learning curve. And I think picking a middle school girl, going through all of her own stuff, and kind of fighting for this attention with her brother, I think just is a huge learning curve for Catherine throughout the whole book. And so I think, it kind of shows, I don't know if this is true for you guys, but for me as a reader, I was reading and I was like, I don't exactly know everything there is to know about ASD, and I haven't had a whole lot of experiences with people with ASD. And so there's still stuff for me to learn as a person and as an educator. So I think just kind of showing that, you don't just learn one thing about ASD and know the whole thing. Like I think on the course website, it says if you've met one person with ASD, you've met one person with ASD. And it's going to be different each and every time. So I think just kind of knowing that learning curve and just being like, okay, like I made a mistake, kind of own up to it and learn from it, not necessarily be like, we can't ever come back from this. Like I, was awful to David and now he's going to hate me for the rest of his life, stuff like that. And so I think the characters that she picked and the situations that she put them in, like a 12-year-old girl is going through a lot already, throw in a brother who's on the spectrum and who takes up a lot of the parents' attention, that's just, a huge recipe for some kind of drama. So I think just learning how to deal and interact with people who are different than you, I think is the message of the story.
And I definitely agree, especially for me, one of the biggest messages that I got from this story is that you don't have to have it all figured out to be able to interact with people who are different from you.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's okay if sometimes you get it wrong, if your intentions are good, and if you can say, I'm sorry and I messed up and I'm trying to learn and I would appreciate you helping me learn. And I really like the fact that the characters in this story are not perfect. And because I think that's a meaningful conversation to have with students, because that's something that I, being 22 years old, am just now learning that, it's okay if I'm doing my best to understand something and if I mess up. Like, it's okay to make mistakes as long as I'm doing that in a way that I'm trying to use those mistakes to make myself better and to make myself a more compassionate person in those interactions later on. So that was kind of what I took from it.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like in 2 words, like, I 100% agree with Jenna and I 100% agree with Jessica. I think, I don't know, I guess I just kept thinking, life and acceptance, just life is hard. Interacting with people is hard, and it's not always how we want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I think those friendships that were formed were not what she thought they were going to be, but they were important too. And I think once she had to kind of get past that, what are people going to say? What are people going to think? I want to be cool and really look at what mattered. So I think y'all said it really well. I don't need to prolong it.
I think the message was basically what y'all said, life is complicated. And I think she wrote the book in such a way that it could be relatable to a bunch of different people.
Mm-hmm.
Like a middle school girl, it could be relatable to that, to you have all these things going on, or being a sibling with someone with autism, or having autism, or you're not really clicking with these friends, you're not popular. It could be relatable to a bunch of different people, which is one thing I really liked about the book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was even going off of that. I was even looking at the back of the book and how they were, different publishers or newspapers were talking about it. And basically, the biggest things that come to mind where it says inspires readers to think about other points of view. So it's so many different people can relate and read this book, and then it can inspire them in that way. And then the discussion starters that you can have following that. And it's that's to me where we have learned the most as teachers. And I think when I have the best conversations in classrooms, where it's we just keep having those discussions about the different points of view, and everyone has them, right? Everyone is different. Everyone comes from different walks of life, different experiences, different ways that they view the world. And it's I think that she did such a good job of incorporating all those, but still having a really strong storyline of accepting that in others, and that life is messy. So I thought she did a fabulous job of sort of intercorrelating all those different things.
Those were all very good, and I agree with all of those.
Thanks, Miss Allie.
Did everyone get their questions in?
Yes.
Oh, that's a good question to end on then, Allie. Great.
Yeah, that was perfect. Good job, Allie.
I was down to 2 questions. I wrote down 3 questions, so I was down to 2, and I was like, this is a perfect way to end this one.
Yeah.
Good job.
Well, thanks, y'all. It's been fun.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was great.
It was
All right, I'll get this uploaded again. Ollie, sorry, I'm with my friend's dog. I will get this uploaded and send the link out to you guys, all right?
All right.
Perfect.
Thanks, Jenna.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye.